132 days until America votes in November, picks the president. If you look at the polling numbers today, the President of the United States, the incumbent, would lose if you look at the numbers today. Let's just look at some latest numbers. This is from a New York Times Siena College poll. Among all registered voters, Joe Biden has a 14-point lead. 50% say they would vote for the former vice president, the Democrat. 36% say they would vote for the Republican incumbent president of the United States. Among women, big gender gap. Look, Joe Biden with a more than 20-point lead among women, 55% to 33%. The middle of the electorate, those who call themselves independents, a whopping big lead there again, more than 20 points, Joe Biden there. President Trump does lead among white voters with no college degree, but that's not as big a margin as he had among that group, an important part of his base against Hillary Clinton back in 2016. So you look at that, a 14-point nationally among registered voters. Now, a lot of pollsters, we're going to talk to a couple in a minute, will tell you should look more at likely voters. But still, these are bad numbers for the president. And if you look at what do voters think, what's their impression of these candidates? 52% of registered voters, that's all voters, have a favorable impression of Joe Biden. Only 40%, only 4 in 10 say that about the incumbent. Incumbent re-elections are about the incumbent. Only 4 in 10 impressed. That's a problem for the president. White voters, both 47% view each of these candidates favorable. Among black voters, with the racial reckoning in the news right now, look at this. 8 in 10 black Americans, black voters, say they have a favorable impression of Joe Biden. Only 6% of the current president of the United States. And so if you look at these numbers, they favor the Democrats. Last night, former President Obama making a fundraising push for Joe Biden, urging Democrats, do not get complacent.
So, bottom line is, I appreciate all of you being on this call, but man, this is serious business. Whatever you've done so far is not enough. And I hold myself and Michelle and our kids to that same standard. Whatever it is that we've done so far to help Joe Biden get elected, we have to do more.
Let's walk through these numbers in the climate with two of my favorite pollsters. Democratic pollster Margie O'Meara joins us. Republican pollster Neil Newhouse. He did the polling for Mitt Romney back in 2012. Normally, I would be a ladies first guy, but Neil, I'm going to start with the Republican. These numbers are horrible for the president. They're miserable for the president. They just are. I'm sure you're not going to dispute that. Do you see him doing things to fix it? You've worked in a number of campaigns, including presidential campaigns. When your numbers are in the tank, you go to the candidate and you go to the team and you say, here's our problem, here's what we need to do to fix it. When you hear the president in recent days, is he addressing his weaknesses?
Well, the first thing the campaign's got to do is you can't panic in a situation like this. You're not going to make up a 14-point margin overnight. That's just not going to happen. It's like kind of like a sports analogy. If you're down 14 points in a basketball game at half, you're sure as heck not going to make it up in the first 5 minutes of the second half. It's going to take some time. You set goals. You set a goal for where you want to be at the end of the convention. You set a goal for where you want to be at the date of the first debate, and then the last 2 weeks of the campaign. I mean, it's a real challenge for these guys. But keep in mind, hey, John, keep in mind, your last segment you talked about the incredible, the unprecedented political environment. Think, man, the crises this president's had to deal with. He's dealing with a pandemic that's threatening the health of Americans. He's dealing with a recession that impacts their pocketbooks. 40% of Americans say they've either lost their job or had their pay or wages cut. And now the national protests in the whole issue of racial injustice. Any one of these three would consume an administration. And President Trump's got all three on his platter right now. That's a huge challenge.
And I think, Margie, to Neil's point, when you have challenges like this, a pandemic is horrible. The recession, we may just be coming out of it, but still the economic paralysis we've had is horrible. The racial unrest is unsettling. Those are elements that make you want change. You want something different. You don't want what you have. And so I just want to go through the president's approval ratings. Overall, 41%, disapprove 56%. That's tough if you're incumbent. Neil's right. There's time, but that's tough. On the coronavirus, 6 in 10 Americans, 58% disapprove of the president. On the economy, he is above water, just barely, but he is above water there. And on race relations, he is well underwater, 61% disapprove. When you look, as the Democratic pollster, when you look at those numbers, if you were advising this president, how do you change numbers like that? And B, what does Joe Biden have to do to keep that contrast in focus if people don't like what they got to prove that you're what they want?
Well, I mean, you'd advise the president to do the opposite of what he does and what he's doing. You would advise him to speak with empathy to the families of the millions of people unemployed, of the over 100,000 deaths due to the coronavirus, to the families of people who have suffered from police brutality. That's what you'd advise him to do. Instead, he tries, I usually leave Neil to the sports analogies, but to work the ref when it comes to talking about polling numbers. I mean, when he sees polling he doesn't like, he just doubts the polling. And that's, not really a persuasive message for swing voters. So he's not doing any of the things. He seems to feel that by reaching out to a dwindling percentage of folks who actually are enthusiastic about his demeanor and temperament. I think there's this myth that his base really enjoys, finds this strong and appealing leadership. That actually there are a lot of Republicans who are nose holders, who don't like that, but agree with him on policies. But he can't grow that percentage that finds this appealing. And by speaking to that group that does find it appealing, he turns off the rest of America. And so you're seeing that in the numbers, the fact that there's incredible intensity in the opposition toward him. And, about half disapprove strongly of his position, half disapproves, are very unfavorable toward him. Those are numbers that have been like this for a long time. I don't know how he changes that unless he becomes a completely different person altogether. And what the Biden campaign should be doing is what they are doing, which is, speaking to Democrats around the country to show strength by bringing the, Democratic team together, by reaching out to to Americans across the board, not just to Democrats, but to everybody, and to demonstrate capacity for empathy and understanding, and to say this is time to really turn the page of this really tough moment in our nation's history.
Margie and Neil, it's great to see you both.